Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to welcome all of students of accounting, accounting technology, finance, finance international, and Master of Accounting as part of School of Accounting in Binus University. Also, thank you for participating in today's international webinar entitled Big Data Analytics in Forensic Audit that will be presented by Dr. Michael Exelson, FCPA, from Queensland University, Australia, and moderated by Dr. Linda Kusumaning Wedari. I'm Archie Nathanael Mulyawan, and today I am the Master of Ceremony of this webinar. Right, before I continue this event further, allow me to read the rules of the webinar so that today's webinar can run smoothly. First, participants are required to attend the webinar from the beginning until the end. Second, participants are required to turn off the microphone. Third, participants are required to open camera during the webinar. Fourth, participants are eligible to receive S80 points and e-certificate if participants join this webinar in full and submit the summary before 6 p.m. this evening on Binus Bekasi website. Lastly, at the end of the webinar session, there will be a session with accounting laboratory. Participants are required to stay in the Zoom until the accounting laboratory session completed. Okay, before we start the webinar, let us hear the opening speech by Professor Toto Rusmanto, PhD, as the Head of Accounting Technology, Binus Bekasi. To Prof. Toto, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Archie. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Hope we are all in good condition. I'm Professor Toto Rusmanto, Head of Accounting Technology Program, School of Accounting, Binus University. Today we will have webinar on the topic, the use of big data analytics in forensic audit. This webinar is a part of accounting technology program in order to enhance students and other Binusian to have a proper and latest knowledge and current issue on the accounting technology development. We normally conduct 4-time seminar in a year, including 2 national seminars and another 2 international seminars. Now, today, international seminar is one of the program. On behalf of Accounting Technology Program, School of Accounting, Binus University, I would like to thank to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Michael Exelson, FCPA. He is a senior lecturer, Binus in Business Information System. He's also program leader for Master of Commerce, the University of Queensland, Australia. He's already here. He will share to us his knowledge and experience on data analytics and in forensic audit. I believe this webinar will be useful for all participants to update our knowledge on the topic. I also would like to extend my thanks to Dr. Linda Kusumaning Wedari. She is a subject content coordinator, accounting technology, who already arranged the webinar, and today she will be moderating the seminar. My thanks also go for all committee from Accounting Laboratory and Accounting Student Association. To all participants, accounting students and lecturers, I really appreciate your presence in this seminar. Then, without any further ado, by reciting Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I open this seminar. Let's enjoy this interesting seminar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Toto, for your speech. And now, let me introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Mrs. Linda Kusumaning Wedari, PhD. Mrs. Linda got her Bachelor of Economic and Accounting Science in 11 Maret University of Indonesia. Then, She graduated her Master of Science in Accounting from Gajah Mada University of Indonesia. She was awarded Swinburne University Postgraduate Research Award by Swinburne University of Technology for 4 years during her journey on completing her Doctor of Philosophy by thesis in Swinburne University of Technology, Australia. Mrs. Linda Sumaningwedari is currently a senior lecturer in School of Accounting in Binus University at Bekasi campus. All right, without further ado, please proceed, Mrs. Linda Kusumaningwedari.
Big data can guide entities in evaluating their data assets by expanding vigorous assessment techniques. In the accounting industry also, the professionals have started realizing the implication of big data. The mixing of massive data with advanced technologies like blockchain, AI, and automatization and machine learning helps you create a strong and automatic accounting process. Industry professional will need cutting-edge data analytic skills to thrive during this changing landscape. Employee with data science and analytic skill may not understand financial statement analysis and business. Therefore, it is important for auditors and accountants understand big data analytics because it helps in analyzing company finances and assets. Big data combined with data analytics is constructing the audit process. The audit process is slowly moving from sample-based testing to data-driven population-level audit that has all key areas of a business. Good afternoon, colleagues and students. I'm Linda Kusumaningwedari. I'm the moderator of today's international webinar. Colleagues and students, once again, I welcome you all. I really wish that everyone who is joining this webinar is in a good health. Let's begin our webinar. We have a very interesting topic in our today's webinar to enrich our understanding on how big data analytics can beneficial forensic audit. Today, we have a distinguished and honorable speaker from Queensland University, Australia, and it is an honor and immense pleasure in introducing our speaker. Dr. Michael Axelson is a senior lecturer of Business Information System in UQ Business School, University of Queensland, and he is a program leader for the Master of Commerce program. Michael is an experienced IS professional and accountant, FCPA of CPA Australia, with 15 years experience in the area of IS consulting. This experience and career includes the evaluation of IS project, IS audit, and IT management and governance. Michael published research in area of the use of intelligent decision aids, information system audit, and information technology governance. Prior to receiving his PhD, Michael chaired the IT and Management Center of Excellence for CPA Australia. Michael has more than 15 years industry experience as director in an IS consulting practice with public, private, and community sector organization as clients. He has significant experience in facilitating development programs and currently teaches into the UQ Master of Business Administration program and the Master of Commerce program at UQ. Good afternoon, Dr. Michael. I trust you are well and thank you for your time. We can see here that we have more than 300 participants. So it can reflect our enthusiasm to your webinar. Okay, students, the rule is simple. Please turn off your mic and keep in mute during the presentations. Since Dr. Michael would like to have interactive presentation session, you're welcome to give comment and questions anytime on the chat room. And don't forget to mention your name before mentioning your question or comments. You may also raise your hand to give your question directly to Dr. Michael. Dr. Michael, you may start your presentation. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you so much, Toto. I really am thankful for the introduction you just gave me. I want that to happen at every lecture that I give from here on in, because normally I just sort of run up and try to get the microphone working and start. So thank you very much for the gracious introduction. So I do apologize for my voice. I'm recovering from a bout of that dreaded disease, but I should be good. Any problems, I'll just blame that on the actual disease. So I am a lecturer at the University of Queensland, and yes, the Master of Commerce program. To clarify, the Master of Commerce program would be our premier technical business degree. We have finance, information systems, and accounting under that umbrella. I've sat through far too many finance research seminars in my life. Some of you may know what that means. Some of you might blissfully be unaware, but I'm qualified in accountancy and in information systems. So I kind of know the choices that people are making at the moment around their careers and their accounting direction and what the professions are doing. And the goal of this presentation is really to highlight what's happening in the world of big data and what it might mean for your career choices and choices you're going to have. I would highlight particularly that I'm probably the first lecturer to have a typewriter on their wall that you've ever seen, or at least for a long time. And I keep those around as a bit of a reminder, because when I went to school, I learned how to type. I learned how to type on typewriters. Yes, I'm that old. Thank you very much. And I put a lot of time and effort into being able to use those machines. And at the time, that's what business did. But we're now faced with a new world where we know that the tools that we need to use going forward are going to be very different. They're very different to what they are now. They're very different to what they were yesterday. If I stuck with my fantastic typewriter skills, I would be unemployable. And so I have invested in my skill set, being curious, explored, made mistakes, and that's how you learn. Let's take a look at our presentation. Okay, so the use of big data analytics in forensic audit, and it's subtitled Big Data and Accounting. So I hope that makes sense to you. It should do. The whole purpose of this is to look at these various tools and relate them to accountancy, and hopefully they're going to be useful for you in the choices you're making. So our agenda, I want to start off talking about accounting, because there is a bit of flavor to that we need to cover off. We need to understand the context we're talking about. I'm going to talk about big data. What is it? Some of the tools that you could use. When we talk about that, we'll be talking about, a portfolio of tools that are potentially useful, and you might choose to use from those. We'll talk about big data and forensic audit work. So I'm going to need to talk a bit about what forensic audit is, but also how this discussion around big data impacts forensic audit. Because I suppose the too long didn't read version is that big data by itself is not going to be useful for a lot of audit and assurance work, okay? Some of it definitely it will be, but there will be some areas where it's not as relevant to you. And I want to highlight and talk about where we can use this tool and where we don't use it. I do have a small tool demonstration lined up, and the point of that is that the point of that discussion is just to show some of the art of the possible. It's very short, to be honest. I just want to talk about and show some of the things you can do, and there might be some food for thought there for you coming on. And then we'll conclude talking about relevance for careers and some other aspects, you know, next steps, call to action, that kind of thing. So the accountants. I know I've got accounting, finance, systems professionals, so commerce style people in the audience. I'm an accountant myself. The FCPA that I was introduced with, that's Fellow of CPA Australia. So I'm a Fellow of CPA Australia, which is Australia's certified practicing accountancy body. And I always wanted to be an accountant. That's what I wanted to be. And then I did my 13th bank rec and realized that number 13 looked a lot like number 1. And I decided that I wanted to investigate information systems. And it is really interesting just to see how much what accounting does marries up with what information systems does. First of all, I would actually advocate that a lot of our accountancy work is derived from trying to summarize and make decisions, okay? The world is really big. If I could have a big mirror up against the world of everybody who ever lived, died, business transaction that was ever recorded, that's what's in the world, right? The world is really big. There's a lot of information there. And if you try and put all that in a notebook, right, on a sheet of paper, it just isn't going to happen. So we always, whether we're an accountant, a shopper down at the shops, or someone who's a doctor, we don't try and absorb the world, okay? Because all the data that we have in the world is too big. It's just too massive, okay? So our data is ridiculously large and we can't get our heads around it. So we've always summarized. Now, I don't know whether you can put in the comments or not, but I don't know whether anyone recognizes what that is on the screen, okay? So that is a thing. That is a way of summarizing information. If you do notice what it is, please feel free to put that in the chat. It's how you used to do your tax returns. Okay, now I have a PhD student who was just returned to Indonesia, and he works for the Indonesian tax office. And he doesn't do his tax returns like that anymore, but he does agree that tax returns are important. These are quilpa, right, which were used in South America to record, did someone get that right? A part of a typewriter, boom, boom, tish, thank you. No, it's not. It is quilpa. They are those little knots in the rope, indicative of when goats and corn and crops were sent to the Incan emperor. So you had to pay your taxes. And if you know anything about your history, the last person you wanted to make an enemy of was the Incan emperor, because you tended to end up, you know, sacrificed. So every knot on every bit of string, where the knot is tied, indicates how things were sent to the emperor, how we made our tax returns, how everything worked. That's a summary, because we have symbols based on that. We have knots, we have ropes, and the color and the knot and the length of the rope is all something that has meaning. It summarizes what we do. It doesn't say what the color of the goat was, it doesn't say what its name was, it just says how many goats were returned. And that's also what we're doing. When we're accounting, we are summarizing the relevant bits, the stuff that makes sense to us. We summarize it and we record it and send it to whoever needs to know to make a decision. This is what accountants do, right? We summarize the information around the business and we send it to wherever it needs to go to help people make decisions. That's what accountants do. When we talk about forensic audits and audits generally, we're validating that information. So we're making sure that the information that is there is valid and is useful. Okay, it's useful in that it's accurate and it reflects the world in some way. So we summarize an awful lot. The picture is of Anzac Square in Brisbane, by the way. We use that information to make choices, to make decisions. So we can go this way or that way or some other way. We use that information to make decisions. The more complicated the decision, the more complicated, more complex the information is likely to be. And it may not always be perfect information, but we have information that we use to make our decisions. We don't make those decisions in a vacuum. So the first thing that we learn in accounting school, right, apart from saying no to anyone that wants to spend money, because that's the rule number one of being an accountant, is know where that information came from, right? What's happened there with my tax return? Who created that information? How was it recorded? Who created it? Has anyone had a chance to change it without us knowing? Okay, so unauthorized data access. So provenance is something we're concerned about in both information systems and accounting. We may not call it that, but that's what we call, that's what we're doing. We're concerned about where the data came from. We're concerned about what it means, the semantics of the data. So what does the data actually mean, right? When do we book sales to account? If I sell a widget today, does it go straight to sales today, or can I put it off to the next accounting period, for example? Or if it's a forward sale, can I forward book it? We create rules which help us understand what the data means. And that's what our accounting standards are. They say what that information in the financial report is meant to mean and how we go about creating it. So in accounting, we want to know where the provenance of the data, where it came from. We want to know that it was prepared in a way that makes sense on our accounting standards. And where we find mistakes, we need to correct them. So we need a process that corrects our data, changes it to a format that we can work with, and we need to understand the quality of the data and make our decisions accordingly. This is what accountants do. Please. No, we're all good. Not sure. I can't hear that, so if I can see it in the chat would be great if there's a question in there. We can summarize the world. So we reduce large data sets down to smaller, more relevant statistics. We can model the world. So this is where we start using the information we've got to make predictions about what's going to happen in the future. So if I've got a village that's making goat tax returns, I can make predictions about how many goats they're going to send next year. That's this modeling the world. And the last one is how the world works, which is where we start tearing apart the data, trying to understand how it works and why it works in the way that it does. Okay, so we might start seeing relationships, you know, between weather and tax returns and how many crops have grown. I'll continue unless I can get the question.
Sorry, Michael.
It's all good, Linda. Resource capacity activity based. That is less statistical, more discussion based, because we've modeled the world, we've summarized it. What do we do with that? How do I understand how it works? And the way I do that is how I've always done it. I talk with people and we all come to a shared understanding. This is all the old way of doing data analysis, and there's a lot of good things in all that. Okay, we know that our accountants brought in a lot of really good things. If you know your accounting history, good old Pacioli is the person who invented double entry accounting. So you've got this person to thank for debits and credits. And we all know that for every debit, there's an opposite credit. And if a balance sheet doesn't balance, we've done something wrong, right? We know that. We've put rules around the data so that when we create it, when we compose it, when we analyze and use it to make decisions, we have inbuilt into it tools, techniques that make sure that the data is of a certain quality. It might not be to the right debit, it may not be to the right credit, but at least we know it balanced, for example. So the accountants realized that they needed this information to make decisions, and they needed to put rules around how you make that information for the making of decisions. So that's what accountants have done. They've always taken lots of parts of the world, summarized it, turned it into something new, and reported on it, okay? Reported the relevant bits. Whatever the accountant saw was relevant, that's what went through. So we don't record, you know, all the details about everything. We don't record every detail about our employees. We don't record their hair color. We don't record their what ice cream they like, because it's probably not relevant from a business perspective. We record the stuff that matters. That's what accountancy, that's what business has done for a very long time. Focused on accuracy, so how accurate is that data? Is it complete? Oops, that can go away. Is it complete? Does it fulfill your expectations of what's comprehensive? So if you look at the world of accountancy, we're interested in accuracy, completeness, consistency. Does the information stored throughout the database, does it match itself? Is it consistent? Does it say we've got 100 items in stock here and 100 items in stock there? That's consistency. My accounting brain flares up when I see where I've got a database that says I've got 100 items in stock here and 108 items in stock over there, because that's not how it should be. It's inconsistent. We also are looking for information that's timely, that followed business rules, that's usable, okay? And is it unique? Is it kept in the right format for our organization, okay? So we only want it in the one spot for it to, we don't want multiple times recording the same information. We need it accurate, complete, consistent, timely, valid, and unique, okay? Now, logically, this makes a lot of sense. We need accurate, we need complete, we need consistent. Logically, it makes sense. And as an accountant, as someone who's experienced in finance analysis, even database designers from an information systems perspective, this makes a lot of sense. And of course, it's how the world should be. Except that our good friends in big data goes and makes this all quite difficult. We're used to making sense of the mess, so we're cleaning up the data. We're designing how our data structures look, so we record the information in a particular way. If we put rules around the data, you can't have 1 million widgets. Stock can't be negative, okay? You can't have negative items on the shelf. We design the data, we design how it's worked through, we report it to the business meaningfully, and we can build our good predictive models using that high quality information to work out what the business is worth. How many customers have you got? What's your customer churn? How many customers leave every year? How much do they spend with our company? And how profitable are they? So I can use that to work out what the value of the business is. Okay, I've done that for a living once. Data science and or business analytics, following these rules, is very helpful with that. But one of the key problems that we often have is that the technologist is not someone who understands, you know, the data. Sorry, the technologist understands the data and how to use it, but what they don't understand is what the data means and which data is relevant, accurate, or complete. They might end up calculating a tax return of $1 billion and not realizing that that may not make sense for their taxpayer. Big data, on the other hand, does not do any of that. It does not put all of your data into nice, neat little buckets, make it consistent, make sure it's complete. Big data is a jumble of data. And I've chosen this picture because there's loads of spanners. There are new spanners, old spanners, different sizes. Probably, I can see some metric spanners. There's probably some inches, imperial measurements in there as well. Big data is perfectly comfortable with inconsistencies. Big data is perfectly comfortable with recording the same information twice. It's completely comfortable with having lots of irrelevant data, okay? So big data does not follow all of these lovely little rules that we like to follow in accountancy, okay? It likes to have, instead, jumbles. It likes to make all of that mess messy. And then what you do is you analyze the mess and try to make sense out of it. That's where we come in with big data. So what is it exactly? Let's take a look. Velocity, variety, volume, veracity. And in fact, I'm going to add another one to that. But velocity, how fast it comes in. Variety, it's all sorts of data. Volume, there's lots of it coming in at that great rate of knots. And veracity is around how truthful the data is. Now, in 2020, there were 44 zettabytes of data in existence. So in the entire world, there were 44 zettabytes, which is a lot, okay? A zettabyte is 1 exabyte, so there were 44,000 exabytes. And to cut to the chase, an exabyte is 1 quintillion bytes of data. Now, a quintillion is a 1 followed by 18 zeros. It's a lot of zeros, okay? That's how much data there was in the world 2 years ago. And every year we're adding about 2 zettabytes a year net, okay? So in 2019, global internet traffic was 2 zettabytes. So that includes every YouTube video that was watched, every tweet that was sent, every Netflix TV show that was streamed, all of that came to 2 zettabytes. So 44 zettabytes is an awful lot of data in the world. Some of that is publicly facing, some of it is hidden away, okay? If you went to print the internet, you could say goodbye to 2% of the Amazon rainforest. So that's just the internet. That's not the file sitting on your computer. That's what's on the web pages of the internet. That does include a lot of irrelevant stuff, pictures of food, cat videos, okay, Imgur is always special, Reddit, lots of data is in that that's not relevant for any real purpose. But it is big data. Feel free to jump in with questions at any point, by the way. Big data, volume. So big data is really, really big. 2.5 exabytes. So we've already established that's 2.5 quintillion bytes of data. That is not going to fit on a USB stick, okay? Velocity is the speed that the information comes in at. So big data is very fast. It's real-time or nearly real-time information. A lot of the data that's in big data is sensor data. So a door is closed, a door is closed, the door is open, a door is closed. It's sensor data. It's going to show the state of a particular thing in the world in real time, over time. And that may or may not be relevant for the decision that you're trying to make. But big data doesn't care about your decision. Big data cares about storing and repeating that. Variety is another key aspect of big data. So it's not just one homogeneous, all the same bit of data. It's all sorts of data. It might be text data, but it might be GPS signals, it might be images, it might be videos, it might be text messages. It's a variety of data types. So data, big data, is really big, comes in really fast, and it's of a variety. So that's the common definition. We call that the 3 V's. Then we talk about value and veracity. Now, the value bit is actually kind of critical because if I take that big data, right, without being able to go through it in any way, the value of it is kind of confusing. I can't get my head around it. That's why we've always summarized data. But the value of the data from big data arises from bringing all that data together. It's got low value density, which means I've got an awful lot of data with you know, per byte, I'm not going to have, it's not very valuable on its own. But as I bring more and more data together, I actually create in total a lot of value. So if I get big data and I've got lots of it, even though the value density is not very much, I end up with a lot of value still. That's kind of the theory. It's kind of like, you know, there's a lot of gold in seawater. If you were able to process all the seawater, you would get lots of gold, but you're going to need to process an awful lot of seawater to get the gold out. It's the same with big data, okay? Lots of good information in there, but it's locked away inside a lot of information that may not be relevant. Veracity is the last one, the data integrity of the data. Now, with big data, veracity, how internally consistent is the data? Does it say the same thing several times over? Is it consistent? Does it mean the same thing? In the world of big data, it's actually okay to not have consistent data. In fact, it's kind of a feature. But that also means that you're going to not be able to ask direct questions and get confused when the data has different things about it. This is all one definition of big data. And I think there's another aspect that's implied by this that we're going to explore. But it is a big, confusing mess of data, and you need special tools to unlock the value of that data, because you aren't going to be able to open up, you know, a big data spreadsheet and analyze it. Okay, that's by definition something you can't do with big data. Volume is our dam. So if I think of lots and lots of volume, I think particularly of, I had a student of mine, we do a project where you find data in the real world and you analyze it looking for insight. And they got data that was admittedly all the same, but there was a lot of it. Every smart meter for their electricity in 4 suburbs in Sydney, every 5 minutes, how much electricity had been used since the last time it was recorded? What's the time? How much electricity? What's the address? And we're talking millions upon millions of rows, lots and lots of data, purely for the electricity being used in the house. Speed, so coming in very quickly. And again, that sensor definition works nicely for this point of view. If every 5 minutes I've got something like 40,000 houses sending me information about how much electricity was used since the last time that it sent data, I've got a lot of data coming at me. And it's a lot of data that's problematic because I've now got to store it. I've got to capture that data as it comes in. My example falls down when it comes to a variety of data. But for example, what my student did was they took the electrical measurements and married that up against weather data. Okay, so different types of data, and you can manage all of that and bring it together. So that makes it more of a big data mess, because the data from weather has nothing to do, ostensibly, with electricity. But it's a variety of data that we're looking for. Lots of value potentially, but you're going to need a lot of data to unlock it. So one of the things that my student was trying to do was make predictions about future demand. So making predictions, if we have climate change happening and the weather is changing frequently, then that's going to have implications for how much electricity people are using. And so we can build a predictive model that lets us see what's going to happen in the future. And with power plants costing billions of dollars, you can see that there's a potential to get value out of it, but you're going to need a lot of data before it's got any meaning behind it. And of course, that veracity, how accurate is that data? And does it vary all the time? So this is probably where my example falls down a little bit, but think about YouTube videos or photographs taken on Instagram. Those things are photos. There's different types of data. They've got metadata. You might be able to tie photo taking to the weather, and it might also have some relationship with electricity in a particular area. If you take all that data together, you've got big data. Now, even from my example, you will see, how does that make any use to business? Okay, because that's what we're about. What's going to be useful for business? And frankly, you're going to have to look in quite a bit of places to see where the relevance might be. In this circumstance, I think it's relatively straightforward if we take the electrical and weather. Okay, Instagram may be a little bit less relevant, but perhaps you've got an organization that markets to influencers. It's a job. So, big data, volume, velocity, variety, value, and veracity. The other part of the definition is often talked about in terms of size. So big data is not something that you can just put on a single hard drive. Now, the trouble is that since Fisher wrote that in 2012, probably the biggest hard drive I would have bought would be a terabyte of data. And nowadays I can easily go out and buy a 4 terabyte hard drive, although it's not cheap. It's a moving definition with this one, okay? I actually like to blend the two. It's around the volume, velocity, variety, value, and veracity, but it's also about the size. And it's implied by the first definition, because you can't have volume and probably not variety in any meaningful way on a single hard drive. But the usual rule of thumb is if you can fit it on a hard drive, you do not have big data. If you can't fit it on a hard drive, now you need something that's different to a hard drive to store data. Okay, so it's worth, I think that's my next, I'll answer that question that's just come through after the next slide. So big data, big, hard to fit on a hard drive. It's a remarkably practical definition, which basically is relevant to your circumstance. If your hard drive will not take the data, suddenly you've got big data. Okay, you'll need to use big data tools to look at it. This means that it's difficult / impossible to load data onto your computer. That means it can't really be loaded onto any one computer. It's distributed around multiple computers, which is why things like Microsoft Azure, where you can store data, or Hadoop, are tools to put data across multiple areas. The data is not accurate or complete. It is what it is. It isn't gathered with an eye to making a point estimate prediction. It's gathered with the point of view of, hey, I need to capture this data transactionally, and by the way, you might be able to find something useful in that data. But you can't normally come up with like an individual prediction, an actual measurement. At this point in time, this is what that value was with any level of real certainty. Big data has not been audited. It's not had any assurance put around it. We don't necessarily know everybody who's had access to it. Its veracity can be, to a lesser or greater extent, uncertain. It's not internally consistent. It's not structured. It doesn't have to relate to other types of big data. It doesn't follow artificial rules like accounting data where it needs to be balanced off. We get it from sensors, from Internet of Things, from people wearing Fitbits, to Garmin's, to hard drive, records in Teslas, okay? We get the metadata from photos on Instagram. It might be social media data, it might be biometric, and we might put all of that data together into big old data lakes. Now, the question that is very germane in the chat is, big data contains a huge, I think basically big data is a huge amount of resource, takes a long time to process and analyze, takes a huge amount of funding. Is it worth it with the funding invested for the data obtained from big data? It isn't worth it if what you're trying to do is look at it from the old perspective. If you're trying to look at data as a point estimate, how many widgets have I sold? How many clutches are on the shelf in the inventory? That's not what big data is for. Okay, go for it, Jason, if you want to ask a question. I see you've raised your hand.
Jason?
Okay. Hello.
Yeah.
Is my voice clear? Okay. Thank you for first of all for answering my question. I would like to follow up my question because like it takes a lot of resources. I mean like to obtain the data, and for sure like for businesses they would think about the expense to get those data, and then those data sometimes like can they get a profit from it? Like, of course, like when we start a business, we're thinking about of getting the profit, and then uh, how
How do we
do I say?
justify the
No,
expense?
how do we get the data? Like, I'm not sure how to value data because it's like
Okay, so
there's
let
no
me answer. Let
yeah,
me
but
answer that question, right?
okay.
So the first thing is, what is value? Value is I get a benefit from it, but it costs me something to get the data. Okay, so there's a cost involved for any benefit. And then you underpin all of that with risk, which is that I don't know what I'm going to get out of it.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So thinking like an accountant, we are risk averse. We don't see us getting the money back. It's got low value density. One of the biggest problems with big data projects is that it's so resource heavy to get the data. It is so time consuming that by the time you've gathered the data, built the system, stored it, we suffer from something called data exhaust, which is where we're just too tired to do anything else with all this data we gathered. Which is why any big data project should think long and hard about what it is they want to get out of it. Okay. And by the way, I'm not advocating in this presentation that everybody should do big data. I think Archie has his hand raised.
Yes, doctor.
Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Michael. I think it's very interesting topic to talk to in accounting world. So my question is about just want to know about your opinion, sir. So in your opinion, does the emergence of Internet of Things, which caused the acceleration of the growth of big data, resulting in the development of other advanced technologies such as AI, robot, and cloud, sir? Because based on several researches I've read, many of them say that the emergence of big data has created a new world in industrial world, sir, where the development of new advanced technology is based on the rise of the data. So I just want to know about your opinion, sir. What is your opinion about that? Thank you, Dr. Michael.
Okay, cool. So the trouble with big data is it requires us to have a lot of imagination as to where we're going to get that value from. Artificial intelligence, machine learning are definite avenues for getting value out of big data. What they aren't is, it's just not certain what I'm going to get out of it. I might get a machine learning algorithm, some form of artificial intelligence from that big data, or I may not. Okay, or it might work, but not work very well. Okay, the world is full of that. There was you may not have grown up with him, but I did, Michael J. Fox, the former actor in the United States, and he's developed Parkinson's, and he funded a program where people would wear phones on their hips, and Parkinson's affects your movement and it affects your life space where you go. And so they had lots and lots of data, but it turned out the consistency of the data, how it was gathered, in the end wasn't able to help them with the predictive model they were trying to build, trying to predict whether people had Parkinson's or not. So the trouble with big data is it can be really expensive to gather it, and you don't quite know why you're gathering it. Or you do know why you're gathering it, but it turns out it's no good for that. So my view is that there is a definite business case for capturing big data, but it does need to exist, and it's probably a business choice. It's not really up to us as accountants. As accountants, we might evaluate the business cases, but we're probably way too risk averse to get value out of big data. And that's okay. That's what we're there for, is to ask the questions, hold the blowtorch of truth to business cases and to see whether we're going to get value out of it. Is that answering some of the question?
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Michael. So if I may to conclude, the rise of maybe advanced technology in 4.0, 4.0 era is because of the rise of data itself. Am I right, sir? So it creates changes in the industrial world. Okay, thank you so much.
Is a big part of that. So that brings us to tools, okay? So it is awful at giving us a dot point estimate, okay? We know that big data is terrible at providing a dot point estimate. It's just not, it's not accurate. We know it's not accurate. It's not designed to be accurate, okay? What it is good for is identifying patterns, correlations. When I do this thing, something else happens. That's where big data becomes useful, okay? I can look at data and I can see that our patterns are occurring, and those patterns are giving us insight into how the business works or what we're trying to achieve. So that's what we're getting out of our big data. We can get patterns, correlations, movements, compare them to other sources of data. And it is great at what Archie just brought up, machine learning, artificial intelligence. Aggregating a whole bunch of low quality data, so bringing all this poor data together, doesn't magically make it high quality. But you need that aggregation to unlock that low density value, that gold in the seawater with big data. So big data enables different types of analysis, because to find those patterns, those correlations and all the rest of it, you need different sorts of tools to what we're used to. I can't put this data into a spreadsheet. I can't put it into a database, okay? Not a normal database. Let's take a look at this video here. So it's a little entertaining, I think, anyway. I may be a poor judge of these things, but this is a video that KPMG created, and it's looking at audit of the future. And it's basically trying to think, what could we use this type of data for in an audit context, okay? In an audit assurance and business management forensic fraud investigation. So let's take a look at this.
Lucy, how's it going?
Hi, Hitesh. I've raised the issue that KPMG Clara identified overnight with the Lacuna CEO, Charles Callan. He agreed something's not right and we need to investigate.
Oh, does he think there's a risk?
He's certainly concerned. He feels like sales growth in New Zealand may not be sustainable.
Okay, well, I'll look into it and then I'll get Clara on it as well.
Okay, great. Sounds good. I'm heading into the office now, so I'll catch up with you when I'm in.
Okay, I'll see you later.
Hello, Hitesh. How are you today?
Oh, it's about to get very busy, Clara. Okay, so we need to do an analysis on the risk you flagged overnight on Lacuna's New Zealand subsidiary. So can we pull all of this data together, please, so that I can assess and make a file note? Okay, so let's start with financial and employee data, brand and market metrics.
Then benchmark against the wider group's data?
Oh yes, and peer companies. Clara, can we just expand on these figures here, please? So this seems to suggest that there's a fraud underway and that they're misrepresenting sales in New Zealand. I think we need to brief this in.
I'll set up a meeting with Charles and Lucy.
So, as you can see, sales have grown 20% in a stable market, customer dissatisfaction is a growing social media trend, and people attrition is up 40%, particularly in finance and customer support.
It doesn't look good. I'll need to notify the board. But please go ahead and organise a deeper dive as part of the ongoing audit.
Will do. We need to assess the situation on the ground. I'm going to send in our fleet of drones to review activity. And Charles, I'll need to conduct interviews with key executives.
I'll arrange that now. And thank you.
Okay, so I'll get on to those interviews. And Clara, once they're done, can you review the data and drone footage overnight?
Of course.
Hitesh, can you reach out to Laura Schmidt, our fraud specialist, and get her to help identifying the extent of the fraud and who else may be involved? And Clara, can you review all communications, emails, instant messages, any relevant documentation, and pass it on to Laura as soon as it's done?
Uploading data now.
Let's catch up in the morning, once Clara's processed the information.
Okay, no problem. I'll see you there. Morning.
Morning, what have you found?
Well, our drones can see that inventory isn't correlating with their claimed customer orders. So sales are being booked, then fraudulently reversed to bolster performance. And Clara, there are signs that it isn't just the sales teams that are involved when the fraud occurs. Is that correct?
Yes. Consistent leaving times, coded email language, and how they behaved in their interviews. There are clear correlations.
We have a significant fraud. I'll get in touch with Charles. This could be a big exposure for Lacuna.
Well, at least the board can proactively deal with it now. Clara, can you model the financial implications to give Lacuna a prediction as to where this leads them?
Of course. Uploading data now.
So, in conclusion, without additional capital, our team predicts the New Zealand business would not be a going concern, particularly now as it has a bank covenant issue.
Okay. Lots to think about. Thank you, Lucy, Hitesh, for identifying this and your prompt action.
So I know it's kind of cheesy. It's not necessarily realistic, but if you take a look at everything that's going on in that discussion, they are grabbing data from social media, where they were scraping social media for customer dissatisfaction around their products. They were also looking at archive data around how people did in interviews and who was interviewed, and so that requires HR information. They matched that up with video data from drones. I feel that's a bit optimistic even now. But that is using aspects of big data in audit and using the tools definitely, along with AI/machine learning algorithms in the form of Clara to help them with their audit. And, you know, it took them less than, I think, 48 hours to work out those pesky New Zealanders were committing a fraud, right? So there's aspects of those tools that are useful from a forensic audit perspective. Let's take a look here. So I've just incorporated some research here that we've had in the past. Factors influencing auditors' use of CAT. So the main thing to realize here is that if you're doing audits or you're looking to do audits in the future, but this realistically applies to everybody, we will use tools when they are relevant and helpful. When a tool is helpful, we know that accountants and auditors will use it. And so the scenario that we're looking at here is an auditor will use a tool if it is useful. And if it's useful, we will use it. Performance expectancy, which is, hey, it's something we are able to use. We have an expectation that we will get some benefit out of it. Facilitating conditions, I've got training and support in using the tool. So these big data tools are relevant and useful to audit. Where they're relevant and useful to audit, auditors will adopt them. Okay, that's a given. People are rational and sensible, and if something helps them do their job, then they will adopt it. But they do have to be able to see that it's helpful. Okay, for your future world, if you are looking for an audit role, then the measure that CATs are used, so computer-assisted audit tools and techniques, okay, it'll depend on the firm you're working for. Some of these big data tools are being used now. I know that the Queensland Audit Office takes the data from every audit that they do and put that into a big data lake, effectively, and they measure their data and use that data to help look for insight for other clients, for example. So the tools are being used, okay? If we take a look at this paper here, this is from MIT Sloan Management Review, 7 Technologies Remaking the World. Now, one of those is your big data. Now, this is where I get on my high horse, okay? I get really stroppy. So I get really concerned, shall we say? I have a theory that accountants, that finance, that business people, what we have done unforgivably, in my view, is allowed the technologists to take over technology, because we've seen technology and we've gone, oh, I don't want to touch that. I'm an accountant. All I do are numbers, right? Debits and credits. That's all I do, right? And we don't do technology. I'll do a spreadsheet if I have to. I'm very good with a pivot table, but I'm not going to do anything more than that. And that is really the wrong attitude to have, because what has happened is accountants who understand business, who know what is important for an organization to be sustainable, what numbers are meaningful and which ones aren't, they have stepped back and allowed the technologists, the technical people, to build all of these wonderful tools, right? And what they haven't done is made those tools in a way that's informed by what's important for business. So as far as I'm concerned, that's almost criminal. Accountants should have always had something to do with these technological analyses that people have been producing. So if you take a look at dashboards that organizations create, who creates them? The technology people. It's not the accounting people, it's not the finance people. They might have been in a focus group, but that's as far as it goes. What we as accountants do is we take information, we take data, and we turn it into something meaningful. And we should have a seat at the table. We may not necessarily have to do all of the background technological data work, but we should be guiding it and at the very least understanding what is being done. And that has not happened, okay? We have a lot of people, including graduates, who graduate and they are terrific at quoting accounting standards and auditing standards, but get them to get data from the right place to inform decision-making, not so good. One of the technologies remaking the world is Seeger's 7 technologies is big data. And that is around the strategic analysis of data, okay? So system analytics and predictive analytics. Accountants should have a role to play there because they understand what data is, what predictions are, and there is a discipline, a feedback loop, which is I make a prediction, and if it didn't work out, I learned what I did wrong and make a better prediction next time. Technologists too frequently don't do that. They don't understand what they were predicting, and they don't understand whether their prediction got better or not. They're just producing a bit of code to produce a bit of information that they don't really understand and don't care about. So system analytics and predictive analytics, that's where big data is going to play. Control analytics, process analytics, that is what we're used to, okay? That is data for monitoring and control and for making process-based decisions, where you've got a bit of data and it comes to a human person who might have to make the decision. But big data plays in that system analytics and particularly predictive analytics space. These are some of the tools that I would expect you to have to deal with into the future. And this goes in a hierarchy. At the bottom is our data, okay? Apache Hadoop. I mentioned Hadoop earlier. Apache Hadoop is a data processing framework that allows data to be spread in multiple places around the world. The data could be on a Google server in Norway and a Google server in Alaska, right? The data is spread out around the world. I just said Google and my phone wanted to talk to me. Thank you. Another example of big data going on. I hope your phone didn't go off. Hadoop spreads the data everywhere. MongoDB is not a data processing framework, it is a database. So it is more specific than Apache Hadoop, but what MongoDB does quite well is it looks after non-structured data, so text, social media, all the data that is not in neat rows and columns, like in a spreadsheet, which is what we see in databases. MongoDB is another way of storing data. They can work closely together, those two. The next level up are devoted data processing frameworks, Spark and Rapidminer. Now, Rapidminer is a nice tool to learn. And in my program at University of Queensland, we teach our introductory data analytics course using Rapidminer. And Rapidminer is kind of a one-stop shop for you to mine data, look for the value, look for those patterns and correlations. So it's a really nice tool. And by the way, I think a chunk of these are free, including Rapidminer. It has a free version, okay? So you can download these and test them in your own time if you like. So Rapidminer is kind of a nice commercially oriented. It's got buttons you click and all that stuff we're used to. Apache Spark is another data processing framework, but it's got a lot more smarts in it, right? So you can ask it to do certain statistical operations in Spark and it will give you back the data. Now, both of those you can access using R or Python. Certainly Spark works very well with Python and programming and R. R programming you may have heard of. It is a statistical package. If you're finance oriented, I think you might have used something like SPSS or Stata or a couple of other ones that are out there. Statistical and analytical packages. There's one beginning with M, which its name escapes me at the moment. R statistical package. And it accesses using APIs, so programming interfaces. So you basically call up a library and connect to a Spark or a Rapidminer. You connect up to it and you can produce stats. You can produce predictive models using R. So it's a good tool as well. And in fact, we used to teach it not that long. And in fact, we do still teach it because we have in our undergraduate program, we have an entire major devoted to business analytics and it solely uses R. So our students doing that do like 8 courses where they learn how to use R. So that's the same degree, it's the undergraduate version of the one that I do. So we now have an undergraduate program called the Bachelor of Commerce. It's got accounting, finance, information systems, business analytics. And what is great about those options are you might do accounting, but also major in business analytics. You're going to be an accountant, but you're going to use business analytics skills using something like R when you get out there in the workforce. So R is a really strong statistics package. One of the things I don't like about R is I come from a structured programming background, a procedural programming background, and R is not a procedural programming language. Okay, it's more of a hodgepodge, more of a mix of different ways of doing things, which is in direct contrast to Python. Python is a programming language. It is first and foremost a programming language, and it can also interface with something like Spark, and through Spark, MongoDB and Hadoop. So Python is a programming language. I'm going to show you Python shortly. I think I've got time for that. Yep. Python is really worth your learning, okay, at least to understand what it is and how it works. When I was a kid, we all learned how to use BASIC, and I have to say Python is not too far removed from that, okay? So Python is excellent from a programming perspective. A lot of programmers like it. Python is a tool that we can use. We then have Lumify and Tableau. So those are both data visualization tools. So one of the things that you can do with Python, and I'll show an example, is visualize data, because people who look at the data don't necessarily know how to see it in its raw form. So visualizing data is really helpful to communicate what's going on. For example, I did some graphics yesterday using good old-fashioned Excel, and I can show someone two numbers, but the percentage increase over 5 years of people doing our information systems major in the Master of Commerce degree has increased by 1,200%, right? So we've got 1,200%. So 112 times, no more than that, 120 times the number of people are graduating with that qualification. So visualizing it, Lumify and Tableau, once you've created the data, done the analysis using Python, you can use Lumify, you can use Tableau to increase that process. So this brings me on to the question that's in the chat and big data and forensic work. Big data, I said, I think at the outset, it may not be useful, but if big data is not useful to you, I can guarantee that there is an indirect method by which that big data becomes useful. So a direct issue, pure big data analysis. And the question that's in the comment is, if the auditor fails to identify errors or fraud in using big data analysis, there is a risk that the auditor will predict the data. What is this risk? I think rather than predicting the data, it's, I don't think there's a risk that the auditor will predict the data. That's something they choose to do or not do. I think the error here is, this is detection risk in our audit risk formula. So inherent risk, control risk, detection risk. I would not be using just big data analysis to look for errors or fraud, okay? That I would suggest is inappropriate, okay? You would be able to use big data analysis as a part of your detection risk, your detection processes. And so the first thing that I would say is you can use big data analysis to understand the nature of the business and looking at the patterns and relationships over time, okay? So we understand the business better by using big data. I might have an understanding of what the customers are doing in the way they talked about in the video. I might have an understanding about the social media, what people are saying about our products, what they're saying on LinkedIn for employer of choice, whether people are complaining that the place is corrupt on LinkedIn or in some other area. That is big data, and that is useful to give us an understanding of the business for a forensic audit. I might also use that big data analysis to create artificial intelligence platforms like Clara. machine learning algorithms that learn what we can see, and I might take a benchmark company, and I might take, or benchmark group of companies like Queensland Audit Office is doing, and compare the company I'm looking at the moment and plonk that into that big data analysis. I hope I've answered your question, Albert. Big data analysis is not appropriate to use on its own to identify errors or fraud. It would be part of your understanding of the business component of an assurance process, and it would be part of comparing, but you would never use it on its own solely as part of your detection, okay? You would have to bring it in as part of the mix. But big data analysis, I'm putting a bracket around that and saying that is analyzing big data. The final way where this is all relevant to you is the fact that those tools developed for big data analysis can also be applied to our forensic audit, even if we're not actually dealing with big data. Okay, so I can use Python, I can use Lumify, I can use Tableau, I can use Rapidminer to explore data that is not big. Okay, and that's probably the biggest area for the future. It would be considerably wrong of anybody, I feel, to stick solely to learning and understanding how to do Excel. Okay, I love Excel. Excel is fantastic, but oh my goodness gracious me, if I want to make some serious mistakes, Excel is the way to do it. I've been doing Excel for 30 years. I've tutored in Excel. I've used it for 5 years in our introductory courses for information systems. It is a great tool, but I still make mistakes, okay? I make mistakes so much that I make sure that I do everything twice, and I have control panels looking for flags, validation points, to make sure that there are errors. If an error creeps in, I find out about it, and it still doesn't happen. And the reason for that is Excel is just horrible for data analysis, and particularly when you've got something right, just ticking a box and having it work. It just doesn't work that way, okay? It's so easy to delete a cell in Excel, so easy to forget to add that last column or row, all of those things. Data warehouse, text mining, and data mining. Those are 3 explicit things that I would talk about from this big data analysis world, but they're not the only things where big data is having an impact for forensic audit. My master's student several years ago did a thesis in his Master of Commerce, and he looked at big data audit tools and techniques, okay? So he's talking about big data analytical tools, but applying them to the audit. And if we take a look at what he's done, so he's done a literature review. Audit standard is the auditing standard. So these authors said big data, we're going to have to bring big data onto the auditing standards. It makes sense that audits should have some form of big data analysis informing the organization that's doing the audit of what's going on. So to flip Albert's question on its head, okay, if the auditor fails to identify errors of fraud in using normal data analytics, non-big data analytics, okay, there's a risk that the auditor doesn't detect the fraud, okay? And what a lot of commentators, as we can see in that first column, are saying, you should be doing big data analysis, full stop. You should be doing that. Otherwise, you aren't doing proper audits. But there's a lot of CA and CM, which is continuous auditing, continuous monitoring. So what big data is great at is dealing with, or big data tools are good at, is dealing with moving data, continuous monitoring. So those tools are very relevant if you're looking at an organization rather than point estimating their financial audit, financial statements, you are looking to see, how do I monitor this organization over time? These tools are great at that because they're automatable, okay? DA standard is your data analytics standard, and DA tech is the technologies. And we can see audit types. So this is our external audit, so a normal financial audit, a fraud audit, or an internal audit. We can see that these mostly have implications directly for these different types of audit. So most commentators have something to say about some form of assurance. This was focused all about audit, but we also know that that's particularly the CA and CM. If continuous assurance and continuous monitoring are relevant, they are going to be absolutely part of the management of any organization. So the detection risk that's referred to in the comment around fraud, around forensic issues, it depends on what regime you're working under. The Australian auditing framework that we adopt, we have the IFRS standard, okay? So we have the normal international auditing standards from IFAC, and I believe Indonesia does as well. Whereas the US has US GAAP and Sarbanes-Oxley. Okay, so US is an entirely different world. Here, the auditor is not responsible like a bloodhound for finding fraud, but they are meant to look for it. But the person who is responsible like a bloodhound is the manager. Now, you may not want to be an auditor, but you will want to be part of an organization that is monitoring and providing continuous assurance. And that's where these big data tools are going to be absolutely critical, okay? Before I show, I think, a demo, when we're visualizing data, it is really easy to manipulate. So remember, the entire purpose of being an accountant, you're summarizing the world and reporting it up to people so they can make decisions. Now, one way that you can influence that is by changing the graphs, making them misleading, okay? So there are 5 ways that people often manipulate. And so they will take that data and present it to people intentionally to mislead them, okay? So on the green one on the left, omitting the baseline, we can see that the graph on the left, you're looking at Group A, Group B, Group C, and I think you can see my pointer. So Group A, oh my gosh, there's a great big difference between Group A and Group B. Our communication skills should be saying, what's going on there? Look at that. We've got at the base here of 50 versus 62.5. So if I presented this as percentage-wise, it would look nowhere near as dramatic in the second formulation, okay? So the one on the right in the green box, we've represented the data misleadingly, okay? This is where our accountants have a role to play, because if you are not skilled in understanding where the data came from and how it was used, like you may not ever touch Hadoop, you may not ever touch Python, but you should be able to talk to the people who create that data and who present these things, because you could go off and make a business decision based on that information that is not supported by that data at all. So you as the assurance provider, you as the preparer of information should understand how these things were come up with. And so that's one thing people do. They omit the baseline. They manipulate the y-axis. If you take a look here, the scale is disproportionate to the data. So this is the opposite way of omitting the baseline. That is getting annoying. This is opposite to omitting the baseline. You're manipulating the y-axis. So we can see that it tops out at 40. Why does it top out at 40? Doesn't make any sense. If I show that as quite a stretched 0 to 40, then my graph looks quite flat. Nothing to see here. But if I showed it more relevant, okay, I can see that my data from just above 5 to just under 15, 2.5 times, okay, a greater change. So that's another way that we might see someone manipulating the data. And this is why we should know where the data came from, how it was created, how it's presented. We might also cherry pick the data. So here we can see that someone has wanting to show, hey, look, we're going really great. I want you to give me a bonus, okay? And that might be terrific, right? I get my bonus. But they've only gone from May to August 2020. So if we take a look at our graph here, we can see that our longer term data, if I pick 2020, that is where everything was doing the best, presumably the best, or at least when it was the highest, because after then, it just falls off a cliff. Using a wider data range makes more sense there. And using the wrong graph, so here we have, and you can do it using Excel and you can do it using any of our tools really. Using the wrong graph, we have a pie graph on the left, a bar chart on the right. Team C, 38%, Team A, 50%, Team B, 64%. Hooray, Team B wins. And yet, Team B wins, but if you add those up, they add up to more than 100%, okay? This is not data that adds up to 100%. It should not be being communicated in that way, okay? So again, I, as the person preparing the reports, need to know where the data came from, what it's about. Similarly, so now when we present it as a bar graph, that makes more sense. Why? Because this one is not the number 4, the purple one on the left. That data is not exclusive. It's not mutually exclusive. You don't have to pick Team A, B, or C. You just say, who do you support? Oh, look, I'm going for Team A and Team B this year, not those horrible Team Cs. They're probably like the Gold Coast Titans. It's not mutually exclusive. You can't add it up to 100%. So it's better to show it in a bar graph. Going against conventions is showing data with a map. So again, on the left, this one is trying to show individuals per kilometre, but you'll notice that it's flipped. We are used to seeing data where it's lighter being less dense. But here we can see that Alaska, which has hardly anybody, is deep, deep black, and individuals per kilometre is something that it really probably should not be shown in that way. It should be flipped the other way. Normally we would show it, the darker it is, the more people there are in that space. Again, need to understand the business side. Why do we do this thing? At that point, I'm about to launch into demonstration, so it's a good time to ask a question before I do that. Before I go into that, I just wanted to sort of say, I'll round this out at the end with a discussion around careers and things, but essentially, as accountants, we have let the technologists take over this world of presenting information that's non-financial and sending it to the board. And that data may or may not mean what we think it means. That data may or may not be kept securely. It may or may not be meaningful. Often what your technologist does is they pick the data that is easiest to get rather than the data that is meaningful, okay, that means something. I think that there is a definite role for accountants to help understand these tools and what they can do and be able to use them and manipulate them so that people get the data, people get the right information for decision making. That's what accounting is all about. And if I sit here and just say, all I'm ever doing is learning Excel, all I'm doing is learning the auditing standards, all I'm doing is learning the accounting standards, I will have a perfectly fine career for a little while. Eventually, if I'm going to do the grunt work, right, if I'm going to fill in invoices, I'm going to develop spreadsheets that report data, hopefully it's accurate. Eventually, there will be an artificial intelligence that does the lower level stuff, if there isn't already. And eventually, I will find myself almost unemployable if I don't adapt to the future world, okay? I'm old, right? I'm quite old and feeling it after last week with COVID, let me tell you. But I don't have to, last 40 years with a career. When I started out, my typewriter was everywhere. Everybody used a typewriter. And, I have a really terrific Android phone, right? In a few years' time, the Android phone will get chucked away and there'll be another phone and another phone. And if I only stick with the technologies that I know when I graduate, I'm going to be unemployable. Or maybe I'll be employable, but I won't be getting the salary that I want. I should be bringing to the table skill sets and data savviness, because that's what an accountant does. An accountant takes information, manipulates it, assesses its value, and presents it in a way that people can make decisions about it. That is all we do. We do not, add value by filling in invoices or even just completing spreadsheets. That's a part of it, sure, but there is so much more we can and should be doing if we want a long-term career. So that's my high horse, my hobby horse. I have a couple of little demonstrations here. Now, I apologize, these aren't really big data because we don't have the time to go through some of the big data stuff. But I have given you two resources there on the screen, w3schools.com/Python and towardsdatascience.com. Now, W3 Schools is terrific to get some skills on anything, right? I use it for my SQL class that I teach in IS Audit, where people are hunting down, looking for anomalies. And maybe after this presentation, I'll start getting them to do big data type analysis. But for now, W3 Schools is a great way to learn. If anyone does have a question, I see that one's come through. Yep. So W3 Schools is a great place to learn Python. Towards Data Science, that is good for some practical applications, particularly around data visualizations. The question that I have from Octravina is, I use Excel to present table and graphics for dashboard performance. Are there other tools like Tableau or Python or any else? What best tools do you start from person that uses Excel spreadsheets? So again, Excel is a great way to make lots of mistakes really quickly. And I would normally probably use Excel to model what I'm going to do. So I would probably use Excel to present a data visualization and get it right. And then I would use something like Python to automate it, okay? So Excel is a great place to get messy with your data, to understand your data. I would definitely recommend a tool like Tableau or perhaps Power BI. Tableau is obviously expensive. Power BI in the Windows environment is quite good and free if you're all set up with Windows. I would probably talk about Power BI for a lot of people, because a lot of companies like the price because it's free and they have Windows. So Power BI is quite flexible and quite useful from and similar to Excel. So I think that's where I would probably start. But let me show you some of the things that you can do with Python, okay? So if I go to here, hopefully you can see my Python screen. Well, it's not my Python screen at all. This is my Bourne Z shell for Unix, okay? You don't have to do Python this way, but it's a free way. and I quite like it as a way of running Python. Now, I don't know Python particularly well, okay, but I was able to knock these up fairly quickly using some examples on the internet. The main thing that you have to do with any of these tools is knowing what questions to ask. You don't know the entire programming language. What you do is you know what questions you need to ask and how you ask them. So if I take a look at the first code, okay, so that is the extent of the Python code. It's about 13 lines, give or take. And you ask the question about Excel visualizations versus other areas. These libraries, these questions here, it is going to go away and it installs these data science tools, these packages, but the only thing that I changed was the very last line, which is where it produces the graphic, okay? So it's going to download data from the internet and it's going to just produce a scatter plot, okay? So this is just the command language. Jupyter Notebook is actually a lot better way to do this, but I don't have a copy of that because I don't actually teach data analytics. So I just need to do this and hopefully that runs. So that's a program running in the background. It's a full program. It's mostly downloading data and it's done now. So if I run that, if I clear that screen, I can see that the output 5:41, which is my time. So if I just open up that picture, it's going to hopefully call it up. There it is. So what it is, that just created a scatter plot, okay? So with all that, okay, here's your scatter plot that you've got going on. So that's one way. That was really quick, and you can copy and paste that and put that into something. I feel that Power BI or Tableau will give you something a bit more professional potentially. But as you can see, the benefit here is that I was able to just run it and that code is self-maintaining. It gets the latest data and runs again, okay? Similarly, I think number 2 runs in the same way. It's even shorter and it's going to give us a histogram plot. So I run that one. And it's also downloading data from the internet. And it has now opened up. Do that. So that's the histogram that it's created. So I can do fairly simple things. Now, if you're used to using Excel, that is not going to be very exciting. It isn't for me. But if I go back to my code, when I do my plot in here, I have options that I can use to improve those images. Okay, so I can add turn on switches, turn them off. And what is nice about those is that they are automatable. There's a grouped histogram, so let's just run that one. It's raining quite heavily here. I told you there was exciting weather about, Linda. We had a flood a couple of weeks ago, and my University of Queensland, yeah, knocked us out for a week because it doesn't rain very often, but when it does, apparently it rains an awful lot. Output 003. So that one gives us a more nuanced, okay? I think you get the picture. And definitely, yes, you could start with Power BI if you want to get data visualizations. Power BI will hook nicely into databases, okay, so structured databases. I just do one more of these. Let's run the, let's run 15. And we'll let that run away. Now remember, I'm doing this the cheapo way. I'm being very cheap about this. I am not spending a lot of money because I don't have a lot of money. I'm a poor academic. But if I also run violin, same time, and I just happen to like the terminal screen, I think that the green looks really good. I open up 15.png. So this is the corellogram, so the 1.5 script that I ran. So I can run that. And if I open up this one, sorry, the last one, you can see that I can create some graphs that I can't do so easily in Excel. So my caution with Excel is that Excel can be easy to make mistakes with and introduce mistakes. If you want to have a way of things that happen, then yeah, it's going to be pretty chronic. I've got one last thing to demonstrate before
Sorry,
I go
Michael,
to...
there is a question in the chat room.
Yep. What's happened here? I closed that down. Excellent. I'm going to open this up. So while that happens, I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Is there a relationship between Python and MySQL? Yes, there absolutely is. So you download data from MySQL. MySQL is an SQL database. So it's got very structured data. And as a very structured data, it is terrific to, I'll stop sharing for a second. It is terrific to analyze structured data, use programming language to download the data and open it up and turn it into something that I can use. MySQL is definitely, there's a relationship between Python and MySQL. For big data, not quite so much, okay? Normally what you would do then is take the structured data out of MySQL and put it into a space where it can be used with the big data tools. So you'd actually take it out of its structured environment, or perhaps a summary, and marry that up with the data from big data, okay? So there's definitely a relationship, but now you've got to start worrying about the quality between the big data and the MySQL data. Does it make sense to compare them? Which brings us to Jason's question, how do we know if the data in big data is reliable, relevant, and could be used to analyze? Well, that's the thing, you don't. It's risky, okay? What you use the big data for is looking for patterns. And does it make sense, okay? Does the pattern tell a story that marries up with the more structured data? So again, I would use big data to understand the business, understand what's going on. If I go back to the video, they used big data to talk about social media, what people are saying about our company. So the one thing you can do there is you got to get good, as they say in the video games. Okay, you got to get good at evaluating and understanding where this data came from and why it exists and where it exists. That's something you've got to develop skills in, because big data can be a minefield if you try to pretend it's accurate like the data that's in that MySQL database. I hope that answers the question. The answer effectively is it is difficult and you need to develop skills around that. So just quickly, Leximancer lets us grab data and unstructured data at that, and I can load up lots of data. So I could take social media data, okay, and put it into Leximancer, which creates a concept map, and it summarizes lots of text. What you're looking at on the screen is a database of about 100 PDFs, all research about big data, what they are all talking about. So that's one tool. It's a commercial tool. It's created by UQ, but it's available commercially. And I've got another one where I've taken the sustainability report from a listed company here, and you could create a database of listed companies, their sustainability reports, and take a look at how those companies compare to the one you're looking at now. So this is their sustainability report, and I can analyze hundreds of thousands of text-based documents to see what they talk about. So that's another more pretty way than my good old-fashioned terminal to look at data. We're almost out of time, so I point you towards the schools and towards data science, and I'm on to my conclusion, which is where I effectively say, look, your accounting, finance, information systems, your business people, the world needs good people who know how to find the right information. So it's important that you do develop skills around understanding that big data and can you evaluate, which means you need to understand what it is, because you can't change big data once it's been created. There's no real way of making it right, because it is what it is. Knows what the data means, knows what to do about it. Many data scientists are really, really good at creating the numbers, but they need to work for somebody who understands that the skill set the data scientist has is around numbers. The person they work for needs to understand that and make sure that the numbers are relevant, that they can interpret them and make that into good decisions. And I've got a photo of my dog and the RSPCA, because the RSPCA has automated information systems that they use to develop information decisions every day that runs their entire organization. They have leading indicators, very good structured databases. It's important to get some practical skills, okay? Rapidminer, Power BI's come in for discussion. We talked about Python. It can be a little scary, but it's actually pretty simple. You don't have to do proper programs, not like load balancing and multiple users, because this is data that you do for analysis. And I think that is going to be a critical skill for the future, okay? Because Python can deal with so much more data than Excel ever can. The little beaver here is dbeaver, which is a database database interface. IDEA is an audit tool, much the same as ACL. And those are all practical skills that we teach in our Master of Commerce degree. Our students come out with those skill sets. So you should be aiming to get skillful in some way with those sorts of things. I really like that big data tools are scriptable, automatable, and you can integrate them with many different desktop and analytical tools. That's terrific. That's useful. You can automate it, script it, and that means that when it is scripted, mistakes can't slip in like they can with Excel, okay? And I would also say that, most people are good at Excel, right? Most people that graduate from our universities are going to be good at Excel, but that's not a way to distinguish yourself from others. Knowing big data techniques and at least having the ability to talk with the people that create the data and understand what it is they're doing so that you can make evaluative decisions, I think that's important into the future. You may not learn Python, but you learn how to interpret and gather that data. Oops. So really, that's the end of my presentation. There's my contact details, Linda. I will forward the PowerPoint slides to you if you would like to share those. I don't know if I have any time for questions. We've taken some questions along the way. Linda?
Okay, thank you, Michael. So maybe also there is another concern about the data privacy or data security if we download the data. So how about the data security? Who owns those data?
That is the million-dollar question, quite literally. Big data shouldn't have private data in it, right? Big data shouldn't have private identifying data. So if I have an operation, there might be data about my operation, but you should never publish my name, identifying factors, with that information. So health services grapple with this all the time, okay? Big data shouldn't need to give identifying information, but you can inadvertently release information that allows people to do what's called inference tests to work out who's doing what. So sure, there's Michael's medical record, but that's okay. He doesn't have his name associated with it. But you've got a suburb, you've got an age, you've got an occupation, and suddenly you can start working out who it relates to. So you can infer from the data. Data privacy is an increasing concern. In Australia, we're kind of doing okay. Europe is really strong on data privacy. No one that I know of expects data privacy to become less of a concern. I think it's going to become more of a concern. And I think that gets difficult to manage in the future if you don't know where your data came from and aren't managing it now. So I would be advocating organisations should know what data they've got and managing it so that they remove private data.
Okay, understandable. Thank you, Michael. So Jason would like to give you
Jason.
another question, maybe the
Okay.
last question.
I think this is one of my last question for the seminar. So I would like to ask for your opinion. So like before, like when you're presenting, like you said that the Google suddenly like turns on, like your phone suddenly like in the mode like for voice recognition, right? Before.
Yes, voice recognition with your phone.
Yeah.
Yep.
What I'm thinking is about our privacy and like I don't think it's like ethical in a way because like I think like all of us may experience this like when we are searching like for hotel price, flight tickets, and then like you're doing in your laptop, but when you get to your phone, those things like those ads just like go into your phone, like everything
This is
goes
where the
there.
law is trailing what the technology is capable of. There is a definite concern, which is what Linda raised before, who owns the data. I have a feeling that in the longer term, the person to whom the data relates is going to own the data, which is going to be horrific for organizations like Google that use that data. So what happens at the moment with your phone is I have the Google Assistant turned on. It's probably going to complain. For that to work, it has to listen to my voice all the time, waiting for me to say the magic phrase, okay? And that doesn't get recorded, but what gets recorded is the topics I spoke about. So if I start talking about going for a holiday in Singapore, I will probably start getting ads for holidays in Singapore, particularly if I say holidays in Singapore one more time. Now, they don't record my conversation, but what they do is the topic, the metadata. Is it an invasion of privacy? Yes, it is, except that you probably agreed to it when you turned your phone on. So there's that. I think in the longer term, that will become really difficult to justify. But even then, ask yourself this ethical question. You're having a conversation with me, and Linda's having a conversation with me. So three of us in the conversation. You and I have our phone turned on, and we've said, it's okay to send me advertisements based on what we talk about. Linda has not. Ethically, the phone company knows that Linda's talking to you and I because her phone has connected. It's located with the GPS. Suddenly, Linda starts getting ads for holidays in Singapore because we've been talking about that. Because she's been hanging out with us, she might be interested in that too. Ethically, what's going on here, right? So these are really tough questions that the world will have to deal with into the future. And I have a feeling that in the longer term, data privacy is going to become much more strict into the future and probably more active than passive, like it is at the moment. And that will have implications for whether you can get value from big data or not. But that's it from me, I think, Linda.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Michael.
Thank you for
I
your
really
question,
appreciate it.
Jason.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Michael, for the beautiful and insightful presentation of data analytic in forensic audit. So I can maybe mention some points among other things. So technology people may be expert in some software, and accountant not necessarily expert on it, but need to understand the data for decision making. And big data analytic is not to find error or fraud, but it's part of detection fraud. So it's important to understand big data analytic is to understand the business process of the client. And big data analysis is to see some irregularities that need to investigate deeply. Okay, so it's nice to actually hear something insightful, and your ideas certainly spark a lively question among all the participants. I hope today's webinar will be enriching our understanding of the topic. We'll look forward that each of us will be enthusiastic in learning big data analytics, since it helps accountant, auditor, fraud examiner, and many other professions. On behalf of Accounting Technology Program, School of Accounting, Bina Nusantara University, I'd like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Michael Axelson that has shared his knowledge to enlighten our understanding of the importance of big data analytic for asset accountant, auditor, and fraud examiners. Before we end the session, please allow me to give the certificate of appreciation to Dr. Michael. Allow me to read it for you. This certificate is awarded to Dr. Michael Axelson, FCPA, University of Queensland, Australia, as speaker in International Seminar 2022, the use of big data analytics in forensic audit, on 26th of March 2022. School of Accounting, Binus University. Ang Swat Lin, Lindawati SE, MCom Honors, PhD, STSRs, SCRI, CMA as Head of Accounting Study Program. Dr. Michael, I'll send this certificate by email next week. And colleagues and students, please give applause by giving virtual applause, or you can also open your camera to show our respect and appreciation to Dr. Michael Axelson. Thank you, Dr. Michael. I'd like to thank to all students and colleagues that have lively participated and engaged during the webinar session. Now I hand over the session to Archie.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Michael, for the insightful presentation. That was so amazing. And thank you for Mrs. Linda, for leading the webinar so well. I would like to remind to all participants to submit the summary before 6 p.m. The links in this chat box or on Binus Bekasi website. Okay, before we start our photo session, allow me to share information about our upcoming webinar. So, we will have another international webinar on next Wednesday on 30 March. If flyer will be circulated soon. please keep the date and join the next webinar. Okay, let's have a photo session. We will wait for a while for the participants to open their camera. And I need to remind you that after this webinar will be followed by accounting laboratory session. So all participants are expected to stay after the webinar. Okay, Kania, I think the floor is yours.
Okay, hi everyone. I am Kania and I'm here to help you guys to take a picture. Everyone, I want to remind you again, please turn on your camera so we can start the photo session. Okay, first let's start the photo session with our speaker and also the moderator, Pak Michael and Bu Linda. Please get ready. Wait. Okay. Smile in 3, 2, 1. Okay, next we will take a photo too with our MC, Ko Archie. Okay. Smile in 3, 2, 1. Okay. How about we also take a photo with Mr. Toto? Okay. Smile everyone in 3, 2, 1. Okay, next we will take a photo with our participants. Okay, so we have a few slides. We have 8 slides. So everyone, please smile in 3, 2, 1. Okay, next slides. Hold on. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, third slides. 3, 2, 1. Okay, next. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, next. Fifth slide. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, hold on everyone. In 3, 2, 1. Keep smiling. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, last. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you everyone.
Thank you, Kania. So today's webinar has been completed. Thank you to all students of School of Accounting Binus University for attending and participating actively in this webinar. Stay safe and stay healthy. See you on our next webinar.
Thank you very much, Michael. Dr. Linda.
Thank you all, everyone, for your very warm presentations and discussion and participation. Thank you. I want my students to be like that, Linda. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.